welcome to another edition of Public Interest. Thank you very much for joining us. I am Gabriela Patram. With me today is former President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. David Granger. Sir, thank you very much for joining us and welcome.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Gabby. Thank you.
Sir, today I want our discussion, or our discussions today are going to be centered around the public sector, and more specifically the public servants. Reason being, we're on the eve of celebrating Labor Day tomorrow, May 1st. It's a very popular day. But before we get into the specifics as to where we have come, where we are, where we're heading, some of the plights of the public servants. Just to give a little history on public servants and trade unions. Trade unionism was legalized in British Guyana with the enactment of the Trades Union Ordinance on the 18th of June right, in 1921, almost 100 years ago. That's quite a long time. How capable have trade unions become in representing workers?
That is a question that lies at the basis of the whole trade union movement. One, it is the foundation of the struggle for workers' rights in Guyana. And without the trade union movement 100 years ago, without the legislation, I don't think we could have made so much progress. The trade union movement was instrumental in the struggle for independence. In fact, I would almost give them a leadership position. And during the heyday, particularly leading up to 1966, we depended heavily on the mobilization of workers. And the majority of Guyanese are poor, are working people. You know the origins of the Africans, Indians, Chinese, Portuguese who came into this country. And it was the workers the workers' unions which stood up for the ordinary people of this country for the longest while. I extend congratulations to the trade union movement, particularly to the TUC, and to all the trade unions, and I hope that in June, a few weeks away from now, we have a national celebration to celebrate that centenary of trade unionism in Guyana. But when you consider the history, it's not just a matter of fighting for workers' rights, it's not just a matter of being involved in the independence struggle. It is also a question of the dignity of our Guyanese citizens, and the fact that we're now in the middle of a pandemic, and the trade unions have an important role to play, not just in bargaining, but in also making sure that the workers could enjoy a good standard of living. And if you look back in history, you'd see there are schemes like Tocqueville, which were dedicated to the trade unions, and we all owe a debt of gratitude to the trade unions. In the early days of political mobilization, the trade unions were headed by people like Mr. Burnham, who was the head of the labor union, Mr. Jagan. Dr. Jagan was head of the Sawmill and Forest Workers Union. I think among the PPP ministers, the original PPP ministers in 1953, maybe as many as 4 out of 6 ministers were deeply involved in trade union movement, at leadership positions. So we all owe the trade union movement a debt, and we all should join in the celebration next in June for the 100th anniversary of that legislation.
And sir, you would agree that we have come a far way in that 100 years?
We have come a far. I don't think we could have made as much progress in workers' rights without the trade union movement. We have come a far. You could not imagine that people used to be dismissed for organizing and mobilizing. In fact, that is one of the reasons why the original BGLU, the British Guyana Labour Union, was established, because when Hubert Critchlow, the father of trade unionism in Guyana, protested against the working conditions on the waterfront, he was dismissed. So, in fact, his involvement in unionism sprang from his being dismissed. And of course, nowadays in Guyana, a lot of people are being dismissed, so we have to look to the trade unions again to represent them.
Okay. Well, I like how you ended up because my next question is that it's in relation to this administration. The theme or the PPP's administration has been confronted with a number of claims from several unions in Guyana. Particularly, or some of them, the Guyana Oil Company, the Georgetown Public Hospital, the Guyana Public Service Union, the Guyana Agricultural and Workers Union, GAO. Sir, why is this administration, the PPP administration, is finding it so hard to respectfully engage these unions?
Well, there are historical antecedents, and the PPP has always had a problem with these particular unions, the Public Service Union, because when it was in office in the mid 1960s, particularly from 1957 to 1964, the PPP blamed the unions for the protests which took place. They don't analyze the protests and determine whether these protests were justified. The unions were blamed for unseating the PPP, and this allowed the PNC-UF coalition to enter office in 1964. And when the PPP got back into office in 1992, again we saw an era of confrontation, and it became so intense that a special tribunal called the Armstrong Tribunal had to be convened to try to resolve these differences between the government and the unions. And the award of the Armstrong Tribunal was I would say, quite reasonable in the circumstances. But since that time, in the late 1990s, the PPP has sought to diminish the consultative process that should exist between employer, the government, and the employees, and particularly the employees' representatives, the GPSU. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is that the PPP administration seems to be refusing to sit down at the bargaining table and examine the claims of the public servants in accordance with the collective labor agreement. On the other hand, you see almost with the wave of '01, the matter with GAWU, the Guyana Agricultural Workers Union, which is affiliated to the People's Progressive Party, has been settled. The vice president simply intervened, and the workers who were picketing IFLUT and other sugar estates, back at work in a flash. But yet we have problems at the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation. In the middle of a pandemic, we have to pay attention to what the workers, the nurses are calling for. We have to pay attention to Guy Oil. We have to pay attention to the Guyana, GPL, Guyana Power and Light. And I wish the government would be more proactive. There's no need for this confrontational posture by the government towards the unions. There are agreements, and we want to have a stable relationship between the government and its workers. But the PPP, I think, the attitude is conditioned by this historical antipathy towards workers' unions. And if we are to make progress over the next 10 years or so, there must be some sort of covenant. There must be some sort of social agreement, some social contract between the government and the unions which legitimately represent the workers. We're not seeing that. And we can't go into these confrontation situations every year. If the workers have entitlements, not only sugar workers have entitlements, public servants have entitlements, nurses have entitlements, teachers have entitlements. Let us try to remove these, the sources of these conflicts and confrontations, and have more stable labor relations. The whole country will benefit from stability in the labor market. But the PP doesn't seem to be bent in that direction. They seem to look after their favorite union, which is GAWU, and the other unions have to picket and protest in order to be heard. It shouldn't be that way.
And we would have seen articles and seen, well, not articles, statements, press releases for example, GPSU, I think up until Wednesday, sent out a release asking to meet with the government again to have a discussion on an increase in wages and salaries for public servants. So it's not a case whereby the unions are not willing to meet with the administration. It is the administration refusing to meet with them for a number of reasons.
I don't see why it should be that way, there's a Ministry of Labor, there's a minister, and he's seen all around the country, and I don't see how difficult it is for him to sit down and meet with particularly the GPSU, which is a large union representing the public service, and the public servants have specific grievances over the last 8 months that have to be attended to. I don't know if those grievances are on the table. I'm not a trade unionist, but what is certainly necessary is for the government of Guyana, the PPP administration, to sit down with the legitimate representative of the public service workers and have the issues settled. And right now the public is in the dark. The public doesn't know to what extent these issues have been resolved, if they've been resolved at all. And there's no need for us to continue throughout 2021 without having these issues. We need a public service. We need an efficient public service. And if you have cordial relations between the government and the public servants, the country will progress faster.
Sir, speaking about issues, one of the major issues with public servants is increases in wages and salaries, like what I've mentioned a few moments ago. It's been 2 years since public servants have not received any salary increase. They haven't received any incentives, any bonus, no retro. If I might dare say, which we have gotten or would have gotten accustomed to under the coalition government. Nothing over the last 8 years, nothing in the last 2 national budgets. However, the administration would have claimed in the last budget that there is provisions for salary increases. Any idea as to why we would not, or the public servants would not have received it as yet, or anything?
Well, this administration is a mystery. They made a lot of promises during the election campaign, and they still seem to be in the campaign mode of making promises but not delivering. As far as I'm concerned, the issues need to be discussed at the table. When the coalition administration was in government, we moved public servants' wages. Some of them are almost 100%. Sweepers and cleaners. People were receiving 10 and 12% increases. Pensioners. When I first entered the 10th Parliament in 2012, pensioners were getting, I think, about $7,500, and we struggled every year until pensioners are now getting over $20,000. And once we get back into government, we continue to ensure that pensioners are treated fairly, public servants are treated fairly, and we don't have this annual confrontation between government and the public servants. We did a lot for public servants in terms of the salaries and benefits. And now that there's a prospect of petroleum revenues, we need to pay more attention to ensuring that the public servants' terms and conditions of service are enough to keep their families happy and comfortable so they could pay attention to their work. So again, I come back to the point that we need to resolve this confrontation, or to eliminate the confrontation that seems to plague relationship between the PPP administration and the unions. We cannot have an efficient government without a cordial or cooperative relationship between the government and the trade unions. Right now, we are going towards a confrontational relationship, and that is going to affect the quality of life of the entire country. It's going to affect the quality of administration in all of the regions, because there's a governmental presence through the RDCs in every region. And I urge the government to bring a halt to it, sit down at the table, speak to the GPSU, and speak to the other unions. Not only GABU, but all of the unions have concerns, and the government must work out a social contract which goes beyond 2021, goes right up to the end of the decade of development to 2029. That is what we should be aiming at. Long-term cordial relations between the government, a major employer in this country, and the workers' unions.
And sir, just on the final point of that, under the coalition's 5 years, that relationship, that cordial social relationship existed between the government and those unions.
The major problem we had when we were in government was the sugar unions. And we met them. We actually brought the unions, Nasi Gau, into the cabinet room, and we sat down and had cordial relations with them. Of course, we couldn't satisfy the demands because the sugar industry has to be restructured. It still has to be restructured. And you can't run away from the fact that Guyanese sugar is too expensive on the world market. And there has to be a rationalization. And the APNUFC administration did not try to shut it down. It tried to rationalize, reorganize the industry, and to keep those three major estates going, Albion, Blairmont, and Iflat. So as far as I'm concerned, that was the biggest labor issue we had. And we had some negotiations which were incomplete with the teachers' union. But the other relations, you're quite right, were reasonably cordial. And I would say that the unions which are supportive of the PPP must sit down at the table. And I think next month, or the month of June, when all of the unions should be celebrating the 100th anniversary of legal legislation, or the legitimizing of trade union activity in Guyana, and try to hammer out a social contract with the government, so we don't put the people of this country through this agony of annual confrontation and pickets and protests. Let's get off the streets, get into our offices and workplaces, and move this country forward.
Sir, on that same point, and circling back a little bit to your 2 points that you made with the quality of life and the quality of administration. Over the last 8 months, we would have seen a number of public servants being dismissed by this administration. What is the impact of those dismissals on the public servants, on those individuals, on their families, and how does it affect the public sector in general?
The effect is tremendous. People have not tried to measure accurately, but the human cost is tremendous, and this country will take years to recover from what has happened. Unfortunately, the government's approach is one of hampers and handouts. You can give a family $25,000 COVID relief. It is essentially a handout. It cannot, prevent, the family from drifting into poverty. What people need is jobs, and there's no point, going around the country with these hampers and handouts. The government has dismissed public servants. One, we want a tribunal so that persons who have genuine complaints could put their cases before that tribunal. And when you see single mothers, parents, breadwinners being sent home, something must happen to that family. It's not a matter of dignity. It's a matter there's no food on the table, and this matter has not been resolved. There's no justification for some of those dismissals. I know a lot of numbers are being thrown around. People say there are 1,500, and they're more than maybe 1,500. Some people are afraid to speak out because they feel that if they take a public position, it will jeopardize their employment in future. But they've complained privately, and the matter is far from settled. When young men and women go into the public service, go to university, they qualify, they are properly employed, they perform their duties in a professional manner, and then they're simply sent home, in August or September. It is inhumane, it is cruel, it is eating away not only at the fabric of government, but also the families. When daddy or mommy cannot bring home salaries at the end of the month. And the government has been very callous about it, and it is something that is unresolved. And, you know, we can go around collecting names, and we could send the names to United Nations or to, you know, human rights commissions. But essentially, what the PPP is doing now is what they did in 1992. Many people were victims of the purges in 1992, and they feared, you know, people were writing me letters, they feared if the PPP ever got back into office, they would simply carry out this vendetta, and we saw it ourselves. And I'm in total sympathy, as you know, on the 10th of November, when we marked the 100th day of the PPP in office, we had a picketing demonstration outside of the office of the president, calling attention to the abuse and calling attention to the cruel treatment, calling attention to the punishment which has been inflicted on families. And up to now, no attempt has been made to alleviate those grievances, to answer the complaints of the workers who have been sent home, to re-employ people who were unfairly dismissed, or to provide alternative employment. They've just, you know, thrown them under the bus and walked away. You know, we can't run a cohesive society when we treat civil servants in that way. Most of the people affected were public servants, naturally, and because the government has authority over those public servants, but it was heartless, callous, you know, and there's been no redress. And, you know, I think at one stage, a senior member of the new administration said, if people have claims, they should put the claims to him. Well, maybe he's a one-man tribunal, but it hasn't worked. And I know of no circumstances under which there has been a mass re-employment of the people who were dismissed in the wake of the PPP entering office in August 2020.
Sir, I'm just wondering, you would have been president and you would have had your ministers and so on. Wasn't there mechanisms or policies that instead of firing these public servants, they could have been transferred to maybe other ministries, other departments, other places of employment right in the public sector, even if you didn't feel comfortable, just to put it over, comfortable in having them there with you?
There are different ways of answering that question and looking at the problem. When I entered office, one of the first meetings I had were with the senior public servants. It was well publicized. I said, you know, nobody's going to be sent home. I simply want an unbribable public service. And I respect the professionalism of members of the public service who even was sympathetic to the previous administration. And I think the present government knows that. And many of the people they left in key positions in 2014, 2015, are still in those key positions. You know, so they know that the APNU AFC coalition was not vindictive and was not bent on dismissal of public servants because of the way they look or the party that they belong to. We're living in a new century, a new age, and you know, we have to recognize people who have the right to vote whichever party they want to. And it is not a conditional service that you must support the APNU, and I feel very hurt that you know, some of the people who were clearly supportive, you know, of the PPP when we entered office in 2015, and were allowed to retain their position, and now there's a continuing purge, a series of dismissals, and it's very destructive to the government service. During my administration, we created 4 new tongues. Now these tongues require not only municipal administration, but also strengthening of the regional administration. And this was taking place in many sectors, delivering of public servants, public services, passport services, and the magistracy, several courts were opened. In other words, the region was being empowered to administer those the hinterland regions in particular, those vast areas. And then you need public servants. You need trained public servants, not only at central government level, working in Georgetown, but in all of the regional towns, in Lethem and Mabaroom and Bartica and Mahdia. And when you send public servants home, there's this feeling of insecurity and uncertainty. And I think some people never want to join the public service, not because they're not qualified, but because they are afraid of the attitude of the PPP. So the PPP has injected fear and loathing among young persons who would have liked to dedicate their lives to the public service. But it hasn't happened, and the last 8 months have been really months of anguish in this country for a lot of young, ambitious public servants. I think their hopes of making a good life in this country, the country of their birth, were really damaged beyond repair by the PPP administration.
Sir, and you're ending it on young public servants. So I would like to.
I think most of the public servants were young, first time, young in these professions, and they're looking forward to long, satisfying careers.
Yeah. So I want us to talk a little bit now about young people and unemployment and young public servants. More specifically, the Guyana Youth Corps. That was established in 1968,
yes.
And 5 years later, it was, if I'm using the correct word, it was expanded into the Guyana National Service.
That's right.
And then
the youth corps was absorbed and became part of the National Service.
National
yes.
Service, okay. Right.
In fact, the National Service symbol is almost the same as the youth corps.
Okay. And the Corps was then abolished in 2000 by the PPP.
The National Service.
The National Service, right. And then the APNU, AFC reestablished it back in 2018. Am I correct?
That's
with that
correct,
date?
yes.
But they took office last year and they abolished it again, along with a number of other programs and policies such as SLED, such as the HEAS, which promoted self-sustenance, especially for young people, teaching them a trade, teaching them business management, how to establish your own business, how to manage it, make sure that you have a profit, and so on. How have this administration's actions and attitudes impacted the employment and livelihood of young Guyanese?
But very seriously, because the youth are most vulnerable, because they've just come out of school, and there has always been a danger of creating this breed of what they call the NEETs, and those not in employment, education, or training, NEET. And there's a large number of young people who are not in employment, education, training. And when the PNC-UF coalition took over from the PPP in 1964, it discovered there was a large number of unemployed young people, and that is why the Youth Corps was set up in the first place. And it was expanded, as you know, 5 years later, and we discovered that there was still a lot of unemployed young people, and we set up the Youth Corps again, and it was based at Kurukuru. I paid careful attention to what the minister who was responsible for youth had to say at the time of the budget debate, and there was very little about youth. There was a lot about sport. You knew everything but Leonora and sport development, but there's very little about youth employment. So the problem is still with us. I don't know what the government is up to, but it's not going to go away, and we don't want our young people to fall into the dangers of unemployment. Many of them look forward to getting married and to having families and to having jobs which can keep body and soul together. But it has not happened. I really am baffled that this government could be so anti-youth, and particularly anti-youth employment. There is no plan for providing employment to young people. There is no plan at all. They're going around the country with hampers and handouts. It will not solve the problem. You need to put in place an organization which can help young people. Or else we'll be building more prisons, more centers. When we were in government, we were actually removing people from the New Opportunity Corps and sending them home, particularly young women. I think by the end of my administration, there were no girls in the New Opportunity Corps at all. But we set up the HEYS, the Hinterland Employment Youth Scheme, so that a lot of the people living in the hinterland, not just indigenous children, but a lot of people living in the hinterland were beneficiaries of that scheme. And then we also had the SLED, the Sustainable Livelihood Entrepreneurial Development Scheme, in which young entrepreneurs were given opportunities. So both the HAYS and the SLED contributed to employment of young people. And then on top of that, you had the Youth Corps, which actually trained young people for employment. Now, for the last 8 months, you can only assume that all three of those schemes have been completely dismantled or just, dissolved. So it means that there are a lot of young people in the villages, in the hinterland, who do not have, under this government, the prospect of being employed. At a time when some of their parents and the elders in the communities have already been dismissed by the same administration. So the problem is going to get worse. It's not going to get better because there's no plan to make it better. And the institutions were important because they provided continuity, they provided a structure for bodies of persons, young people, to be trained to take up these jobs on their own, not necessarily in the public sector. You don't want let people necessarily becoming civil servants or police or soldiers. You want them to be self-employed to the extent that they could be self-employed. But they need the training, and the rug is being pulled from under the feet of the young people. And I don't think I've heard from the present administration any plan to actually provide jobs for young people. You see people going out with hampers, you see people giving out little cash grants, but that is not going to solve the problem of youth employment. It never has done so and will never do so. You need to set back up institutions and have our young people trained for the long term.
Were you shocked at the announcement and the closure of the Bertram Collins College?
Shock is a mild word, it was sickening that you can create for the first time in Guyanese history a college to ensure that the public servants people don't just come off the street and become a public servant the next day, but they could actually be put through a formal course so that they can see their careers 30 or 40 years down the road. If you enter the public service at the age 18 or 20, you have 30, 35 years of service to give. And to make best use of that service, you need to start on a sound educational footing. That is all the college aimed at doing. To enable that young person, that young school leaver, to graduate, to go to university, to get higher qualifications, and to be able to serve in any branch of the government. And I felt at the time it was a good idea. If the present administration thought that there were problems, solve the problems. Don't shut down. If your car is punctured, you don't throw the car in the canal. You fix the puncture. I don't know that they felt that the Bertram Collins College was damaged anyway, but I think they have missed a good opportunity. And as I said, you're not looking to enlarge the public service, you're looking to improve the public service. And we have 10 regions to run in this country. And you have now 10 municipalities, and you need efficient an efficient public service if you are to give each region the capability to deliver services efficiently in all those areas. For example, the Rupununi is bigger than Costa Rica. You know, the Mazruni Kuyuni is bigger than the Netherlands. You don't want somebody who's sitting down in an office. You want public servants who are going to get in planes, get in boats, get into SUVs, and go into these regions and extend government services to all of them. You know, payment of pensions, passports, medical services, pure water supply. All of these functions are performed by the government or state corporations, and you need an efficient public service. And the Bertram Collins College was meant to train efficient public servants. I don't know what's going to happen under this administration. We're not making progress. You know, there's a lot of spite. There's a lot of vengeful attitudes to what was set up during the coalition. But it is not helping Guyana, and it's not helping the citizens, the ordinary people who depend on those public services.
Sir, the ordinary people have been affected, or let's say everyone has been affected severely during this pandemic. It's the worst health pandemic that Guyana has seen probably in its history. We see schools have been closed, businesses have been restricted in their operations, they've had to invest in terms of getting their, if they want to open up back, have certain things in place and so on so that they can keep their business operating. Public transport or transportation in general has been restricted in terms of how you use it, flying and so on. And some people, especially public servants like we're centering our discussions on, have been without work for over a year. What has been this administration's approach to unemployment during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, what has been the administration's approach to anything involving the public, the COVID itself? You know, every week the death toll rises. This morning, I think it must have been about 295 or 296. And we are performing very badly. And the COVID is a major problem. Of course, with the closures, it is all well and good to insist on enforcement, but there is no plan to ensure that the economy can pick up, that employment could be restored eventually. There's no exit strategy, so to speak, from this pandemic. Every country is suffering, but other countries have planned, to open up, at the same time protect the population. But we're getting neither. We're getting no protection, and we're getting no forward planning out of this administration. We sit and look at these numbers every year, every day, and the numbers keep climbing. Yes, we hear about the government just regurgitating its old election promises, manifesto promises, 50,000 jobs. But no, it is true, nobody could have planned for the pandemic, but now that the pandemic, we have to plan to get out of it. And, it's time to stop boasting about, we're creating so many jobs and we're opening there are no jobs. There are no jobs, and there's no plan to provide employment for people in this pandemic. There's not even a plan to deal with the pandemic. No Guyanese could say that 1 month from now, 2 months from now, we're going to create this community of immunity, or herd immunity, a community of immunity. We see migrants still coming into the country. We see some rising rates of infection, and children have been out of school. So there needs to be a plan. There needs to be a sitting down between the government, opposition, civil society, business sector, all elements, all of us are involved, and determine how we're going to get out of this pandemic. and how we are going to provide jobs for people. And there is a big hole. Some people have not earned for a year. Children have not been in school for a year. Some businesses have shrunk. And we need to get the government to sit down and tell us exactly what is happening. What is their plan for getting out of this pandemic? We don't know that as yet. And as a result, a lot of the people are not only unemployed, but they're uncertain about their future under this administration.
So to wrap up our discussions today, on the eve of Labor Day, you would have said so much and highlighted a number of, if we want to say, negatives and disadvantages more than the advantages for the public servants, for the country in general. On the eve of Labor Day, what is your encouragement to the labor movement, to public servants, as we go into tomorrow?
Well, 1st of May is important to all of us. As I said, historically, we have a lot to be thankful for, and the labor union bore this country on its back for most of that period, all of that period, particularly during the difficult days of the 1960s. Labor unions generally were in the forefront for the struggle for independence. We need respect. The government needs to respect labor. That is my biggest wish, that the government will change its attitude to labor. It's not a matter of PPP unions or PNC unions, it's a matter of Guyanese workers. The GPSU represents Guyanese workers, NASI represents Guyanese workers, GAWU represents Guyanese workers. And the government needs to get out of this 1960s, mindset that every union is a potential enemy. The workers are necessary to develop this country, and we must have a formula, a contract, which guarantees the employment of workers over a long period. And in that way, we can guarantee the development of Guyana over a long period, particularly that decade of development, 2020 to 2029. We cannot do it without the workers. And the PPP needs to change its attitude to the working class in this country if we are to be successful as a nation.
Sir, just one final thought. I was reading a commentary this morning that said that the public servants are the backbone of any country. Do you stand with that statement as well?
Like blood. We cannot do anything without the public servants. And there will be chaos without the public service. And that is why I said a minute ago that the PPP needs to change its attitude to the GPSU and the public servants in general. Call in all those people who have been dismissed, interview them, and those who want to return to work, get them back to work. Let this country move forward. We cannot move forward without an efficient public service.
Well, sir, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure having you and sitting down and discuss with you. So thank you very much for being with us today. You will be back with us next week, right?
Always.
And to
Every
you,
Friday.
every Friday, yes. And to you, our viewers, we want to say thank you very much for joining us on this another edition of The Public Interest. I'm Gabriella Patram, and we wish you a safe and wonderful weekend. And please, we encourage you to please follow all COVID-19 guidelines. Goodbye.